So managing encryption and keystore files in Jaspersoft Server 7.5. So there have been a lot of changes since 7.2 to JRS itself in order to make the web application more secure. So here's the agenda. The introduction is basically this slide. I'll talk a little bit about what is a keystore, what has changed in the keystore. I'll talk a bit about keystore management, a short discussion on key aliases, which is more of a 7.8 feature. And then this actually says demo, it'll work. Then we'll have a demo and then some takeaways, Q&A, and that's about it. So let's get started. So what is a keystore? If you don't know what a keystore is, you can picture it like a strong keyring or password manager. Basically, it holds a bunch of keys on it, and it's symmetrically encrypted. So internally within JRS, we use a lot of different keys for encrypting data that's passed between client and server and things like that. Exports as well. When you export a file from JRS, it uses an encryption key that we store in this keystore. So you may be wondering what has changed. You may not have even thought about the keystore in the past. So what we've done is we've made changes to the entries in the keystore themselves to make them more unique across all JRS instances, which is more secure than if all instances were using the same key. However, this will take some management on your side. So essentially you'll need to keep track of these files, which you didn't have to do previously. It's kind of like remembering a new password, if you will. And it makes some pretty large changes to how import and export functions. So this affects you in many ways. You need to maintain backups of these key stores when upgrading. It may be smart to keep backups otherwise, just in case, hard drive failure or something like that. Import and export do not function the same as 7.2. This is an important fact because basically what we've done is we've included a new key that is unique to import and export. So when you're exporting from a version later than 7.2, you will not be using the same key across different instances, which means upgrades as well as migration between environments will require a bit of additional effort. The best thing that this offers, though, is that your web application will be more secure. So there's always a trade-off in cryptography on simplicity, usability, and security. So as of 7.5 and beyond, you now need to, as I mentioned, keep your keystore files around, back them up, ideally back them up into a secure location. Where can you find those files? So these files in the most default configuration are usually stored in the user who is running the server or that installed the server in their home directory. So on Unix-like systems that are POSIX compatible, this would be home, like home/user. On Windows, I believe the environment variable is percent home path %. The files are named as such. JRSKS, this is the Keystore file. JRSKSP is the properties file. They both work together to provide the Keystore functionality. As of 7.8, keys can be generated and added by system admins in the command line. But as of 7.5, the key stores are placed and referred to in this properties file by a hard-coded path. So this can actually be problematic when doing import and export between the same version, 7.5, but on different servers that may have different usernames, for example. You'll want to have to change that hard-coded path, but there's a link in the resources that will be included with this video that tells you how you can go about doing that. So again, this properties file, it's a base64 encoded Java properties file that has data on accessing the key store and its contents. You may wonder, well, it's just base64 encoded. How's that secure? Well, there are file permissions. So ideally, the user that is operating the server and accessing this file will be the only one that can read it, them or their group. In fact, I don't believe the server will run without proper permissions on these files. In Windows, you don't have the kind of Unixy numeric permission system, so you need to make sure that read access and write access is available for the owner, and at least read access is available for the group or service user, rather, whoever is running the application server, essentially. Yeah. So we also have key aliases, which this is something that's kind of new to 7.8. Basically, we've augmented our existing import and export scripts such that you can import different keys or generate them, provide an alias. This works really well in the kind of dev to test to production environment setting, where you can have a different key with a different alias. They're all stored in the Keystore, and then you could reference those when exporting. There's some additional details on here. So in the UI, as I'll show later, you'll see you can select different keys to export from in 7.8. And if you add your own, when using the command line tool, you need to use a specific flag so that it will be available in the UI. Imports must still be done by command line, and the keys themselves are created using our JS import tool, which is a command line tool we bundle. It's a bash or batch script, depending on your operating system. We have both import and export that you may or may not be familiar with that can facilitate importing and exporting between different servers. So let's give it a shot. We've got here we have a version 7.2. So I'm just going to log in as the super user. And the super user is able to do an export, of course. So usually if you've only worked up to 7.2, with up to 7.2, you would do your export, you get your export, then you do your import. However, if we jump to a newer version, for example, you'll see my session has timed out. You'll see that when importing, you actually have more options here. We've got server key, which is kind of the default key generated when your server is created. We have something called the legacy key. Again, I want to point out this is 7.8, not 7.5. As well as a key value or a stored key, which can be stored in your JRS repo as a file, as a text file, which is basically the same as the key value, but stored as a file. And then when exporting, you also get choices. So how would you, for example, export users from 7.2 to say 7.8? Let's say I want to take all roles, all users. Don't really want any of this. Pardon my cat, by the way, she's Siamese and talks quite a lot. Alright, we'll export these things. Save the file. And we can go to 7.8. We import. And in this instance, you'll want to select legacy key. Because so essentially anything after 7.2, so from 7.5 and beyond, each server has a unique key that it uses to decrypt the values inside of your export. If it's a version 7.2 or below, you can use this option to import the file. So I need to go to my downloads folder and select my export. I've selected legacy key because it's from an older version, and then I will import it. It succeeded. I guess since this server is kind of still basic, I can't really show you that it did import something, but it works. You can, if you'll take my word for it. So where a lot of people trip up would be importing between 7.5 instances. So as I mentioned in this presentation before, we have this Keystore properties file. And as long as the users are the same, you really shouldn't have a major issue. And there's a pretty good wiki page on our community site that covers everything required to do this. But again, I can't stress enough to back up your files, which leads me into the takeaways. Back up your files, your Keystore files. That's both of them, both the properties file and the Keystore file. The files need to match when moving from one server to another after 7.5, so 7.8 and beyond. Another thing to note is that Keystore files are not backward compatible between 7.8 and 7.5. That said, this means if you have this doesn't mean that when you're upgrading that it won't work. It means that if you have multiple instances on the same system, um, when installing 7.8, since the files are stored in your home directory, they will be overwritten with a new format that's used in 7.8, and then any previous 7.5 instances will most likely fail to run, which again is important that you back up your Keystore files. So let's see, I did a demo from 7.2 to 7.5. I've shown kind of, or 7.2 to 7.8 rather. I've shown changes in 7.8 that we have around import and export. Another important thing I think to mention here is that this legacy key, if you ever need to work with our support team, for example, you can use this key and then they will be able to decrypt your export. So that can be beneficial when you need to work with support and you have information that's not too sensitive. You'll be able to send them an export this way. And I believe that's...
So Grant, just so I'm clear, that legacy key option there that you're showing, that's if you want to put it on basically some other server than yours. The server key option is if you're just exporting it to re-import it to the same exact machine. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure I understand it. This is, as Grant said, this is a new feature in 7.8, which just came out a couple of weeks ago. So that's not there for 7.5. Now in 7.5, Grant, how would you, if they're in 7.5 and they have to export to send to say support, is it possible to do that, or do they have to use the command line tool to do that?
They do need to use a command line tool to do that, but it is possible, luckily. So there is a link to this page below, or it'll be in the description, or in the slides rather. We have this wiki page on kind of the rundown on what you need to do. So as you mentioned, there's a if you need to go from 7.5 to 7.5, I'm sorry, Mike. What was the...
Yeah, if let's say they have a 7.5 instance and they need to send something to support on our side,
right.
support the reports or the repository.
Sure. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but we have a import and export tool here. So basically you can say like JS export, I think you can say everything, zip.
And the file that, or the page that Grant is open there, I did put in the chat window for everyone, so you have that direct link if you don't want to wait for the slides. You can actually take that link now, and this is a really thorough wiki article that talked a lot about some of the stuff that we talked about here. But as you can see here, Grant's pulling straight from one of these sections here that shows if you want to export that's importable by anyone, including outside your org, you have to do what he's doing here.
Yeah. As Mike said, this is kind of a requirement to get it out of your server and into the hands of support, for example. So we have an existing key alias that's called deprecated import export inc secret. And you can essentially use that to create an export zip file that uses what we now in 7.8 refer to as the legacy key. They're essentially the same thing. So as you can see here, it's packing everything into my export. I thought it was. Where did I put it? So that's 7.2. So yeah, I think that's it from my end.
So again, as a reminder to everyone, if you have questions, go ahead and fire them away in the Q&A section, and we'll go through those. We do have a couple questions here now, Grant, that I'll feed to you. The first question is this feature included in the community edition as well?
No, I don't believe that either import or export are in the community edition.
Yeah, so I think the community edition is like our free version, right? And I believe it's just
Well, as far as import and export, that said, some other security-based changes have been made, like regarding keys that are used for different things like client-server communications. And those changes are in CE and will make your web application more secure.
So when they have the community edition, though, do they have the command line tools to import and export still? I believe they do, right?
Yeah, actually, yeah, you're right, because they're part of Buildomatic.
Right. So you still have that in your Buildomatic. So you should have the same things, I think, in theory should
So
apply.
yeah, actually, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
There's just not a nice interface to wrap it around with. And yeah, key stores should still be backed up. They should also still exist in CE. And it would be important to follow the prescriptions here.
Absolutely. So here's another couple questions here. This one's a bit long, but let's see if we can follow. Can you open the Q&A? You might be able to follow this along, Grant, better than me speaking it. But it says we configure the Keystore to propagate in the app server so that if we remove a user from a machine, the files are uninterrupted by storing them in the config directory, setting the key.init.properties file. You stated earlier that you should not have problems if the files are on the same user. How does this impact Keystore?
Um, so I can't view Q&A, or can I?
Should be
Oh,
able.
here we go. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Let's see. So if we remove a user from the machine, um, so I'm having a little trouble understanding this question.
It's a complicated one. I would suggest, and it's an anonymous person, so you didn't put your name, which is fine. But if you would like to, we could definitely follow up with your specific problem or use case, I should say. If you want to send an email after the session to Dr. Jaspersoft at tipco.com, that will come to me, and I can make sure that Grant gets it, and we can start a back and forth there to figure out what your needs are. I think the next part of his question also is related, I think, to the other question we have here, which is, could you go from a 7.5 to 7.5 instance, or show us how we create a common key store among our different instances so that we can import export reports that they will all use? Now that's kind of what we just did, I think, right, Grant, with the using the JS export command on the command line. That's kind of the important thing. If you have multiple 7.5 instances, like a dev and a prod type instance, the idea is you need to have that key store file duplicated across those machines, and the same key store file will work should if everything is structured the same, as in the same user, same path to the keystore file, and so on. I think that answers that question. And then Jordan asked if we could give a demo on creating a standard key store across separate 7.5 instances. I think that's related, Jordan, if I'm not mistaken. I think that answers your question. Let me know if it doesn't. Normally, when you move from into a new instance of Jaspersoft, the key store files get created automatically for you. So if that's what you're talking about, there's nothing you need to do there the first time in. But that's why this becomes a problem when you have different instances, right? Is that you have a key store file that was created, and if it didn't come from the previous instance that already had a key store file, it will not work. You will not be able to decrypt your data from your repository, and it will render it useless. So you have to kind of duplicate those key store files across separate instances. You don't have to create them, but once one is created, that's your file you need to back up. As Grant said, you got to make sure you back it up and use it, and then you got to move it from one environment to the other. Either you can physically copy it if everything's the same, or you can use this export command that Grant just showed, which is also in the document that I sent you the link to do that. In 7.8, Grant showed the new feature where you can use the UI to do that. That was a big problem with 7.5, is basically you couldn't use the UI to export key store files, but now that should be there for you in 7.8. But in 7.5, and correct me if I'm wrong, Grant, you have to do what he's showing you here on the screen.
Yeah, so basically there's no way through the UI to do what you're asking. I guess the one way to kind of dilute both of these questions would be like, how can I keep working with JRS like I did with in 7.2? Is that a good kind of similar to what's being asked? If so, this is most likely the best way to go about it would be to use these command line tools, which does mean you need someone that has access to the command line for that server. And you use this key alias value, and you should be able to, yeah, create an export that will work between different 7.5 instances.
Right. And
Um,
Jordan did follow up too, and he just said, so if he copies the key store file to each instance and restarts the servers, they should be able to use the same JRSKS and JRSKSP files. And again, as long as the user structure is the same and the path is the same for the key store files, then I believe the answer is yeah, right, Grant?
um, yeah, so um, they basically would need to be like identical systems, essentially. Like the path to what your installation needs to be identical. The user and the group of the users should most likely be the same, um, or they should be the same. The path in which the key store is located needs to be the same. The user running the server needs to be the same. Um, so yeah, I mean, there's a lot of kind of like assumptions in that statement, but if it should work, yes. If
Pull the document up to Grant, the wiki article, I mean.
sure.
Because we can show you guys, it does state that here. I think it's further down. Where is keep going down where I think that there's just the link that had how to deal with it if they're not the same, right?
Oh, right. So
Keep going down. I think it was further. There you go. Yeah, so this section here, installing across multiple servers, kind of walks you through that same what Grant just said, and then there's in that step 3, there's a little link there that says if the files to the paths are different, then you got to edit the properties file, and that's what that link shows you how to do there, how to update that. So that's probably the most common use case, is that maybe the path is slightly different, but if you're setting up multiple environments, in theory you want things to be the same anyway, because that's the whole point of a test and dev, type environment, is to have it as close to production as possible. But if for some reason they're different, you do have to deal with that when moving from one instance to the other.
Do you want me to quickly like go over that, or?
You can talk about it. Yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead. I mean, it's right here. Go for it.
Sure. So basically, that's not the right one. So here we have the JRS KSP files. So I do like OpenSSL base64 minus D. Basically just if you decode the properties file, you'll essentially see it's just plain text. Really the only reason it's obfuscated is because in a perfect world, you should never have to edit this file. However, in the case of 7.5, there's a property down here that doesn't exist anymore. This is my 7.8 instance. I don't know if I have a 7.5 instance running right now, but there used to be a property that was called KS path. And KS path basically points to the directory that contains JRS KS and yeah. And yeah, I think someone earlier mentioned Keystore init properties. That's going to be in your webend folder, and it sets some environment variables like KS and KSP that point to directories. So in your
Basically, you have to update both those paths if your path is different, right? And then re-encode that file.
yeah, so you basically you need to edit the path, then you would remove the D flag and output it to another file. And yeah, I hope that
So,
answers
yeah,
the question. And
yeah, I
I
think
can help follow up if needed, like
yeah.
gladly.
No, that's. I think that was good. And Jordan says thanks for the clarification. So, any other questions before we wrap it up? Do you want to go real quick to the slides since you're already sharing, Grant? And you'll see here the resources slide. This just points you to some of our basic resources that we have about customer success, the community answers. If you want to post questions there, you can. If you tag hashtag Dr. Jasper, then that gets sent straight to me as well. And then there's a quick start guide. And then of course we had the link from today's presentation, which I already put in the chat window for you all. So hopefully you got that. Go ahead and go forward one more slide there, Grant. Oh yes, so again, our next topic will be on the REST API. The REST API, and that'll be October 8th. So look for an email in a couple weeks probably for that. Again, there's usually we aim for the second Thursday of every month. And that is partially based on previous votes. Those of you that joined late, if you want, you have a quick second here, you can go to the polls section where I've listed a bunch of potential topics for future Dr. Jaspersoft office hour sessions. A bunch of you have already voted, which is wonderful. And the leading vote getter is something that I already have slated for November, I believe, but you've just solidified that for me, which is going to be customizations in JRS. So that's something that we'll probably talk about in November. But if you have anything else, go ahead to the next slide, Grant. Any other questions, anything that comes up, based on this, or those of you that are watching the YouTube video, feel free to email us. The email address has changed since the last session. We are fully Dr. Jaspersoft now at tipco.com versus Dr. Jasper before. So please email us at drjaspersoft@tipco.com. That should come to me, and we'll get you addressed and your questions answered. Always, those of you that are existing customers, if you're in the Upshift program, you can reach out to your customer success manager with questions, and you always can open support tickets. Our support staff has been dealing a lot, as you can imagine, with these Keystore file issues in 7.5 and getting folks there, so they're pretty well versed on it. So feel free to open tickets there as well. So again, I just want to thank Grant for joining us today, and thank you all for joining us and attending, and hopefully we'll see you guys next month.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for attending.
All right, signing off.